Good morning.
Good morning.
Wow, there's some guys woken up. It's great. As Randy said, I really want to focus a little more specifically on three things. Obviously, the economy is an important part of what we're looking at this morning, but really its connection to employment and education. So with that, I want to start with kind of the three questions. What are the three questions that really drove our research? How are the region's employers changing, and how does that impact the demand for jobs by industry, by occupation, and even skills and the things that employers are looking for? That's kind of a central question that we asked kind of throughout this research. How are the region's residents, the people that live in East Bay, how prepared are they for the work of today and tomorrow? And then really, how are the region's educational programs succeeding in training people for work, and what can you learn to continue to improve how we do that? And I think Randy hit on a good point. We did kind of start to dig into that educational kind of performance outcome data. You know, I apologize, we did use some CST data as well, so some of that's in there. But starting to look at that, and I think one of the important things that that was kind of discussed in our group is the idea of experimentation. What I mean by that is how do we measure and quantify the different programs and strategies that are going on, and most importantly, succeed or fail, how do we learn from that? How do we learn from the different programs and strategies and ideas that are being developed now, and how do we learn? So whether it succeeds or fails, we're doing a better job a year from now, and a year from then, and a year from then. So with that, I want to do a few things today. I want to start, and I think as somebody who's had the idea of demand side approach to workforce development driven into me, I want to start with employment in East Bay. Where is it? What does it look like? How has it changed? How has the recession in the last 5 years really changed East Bay's labor market, and what employers are looking for? I want to look at human capital. What do I mean by that? How are the workers that live in East Bay, how skilled are they? How are they available? One of the things we've learned is a job is not a job, a worker is not a worker. The skills and the abilities and the expertise they bring is important, and starting to evaluate that at some level. How are we doing in terms of preparing for the jobs of tomorrow? Looking at education, looking at training, looking at skills development. How is that happening in the East Bay? I want to dig down a little bit and look at some of the specific profiles of the kind of the sub-regions within East Bay. We've broken the two counties into kind of 6 sub-regions, look at their differences and how they differ. And then lastly, I want to spend a little time talking about what does this mean? So what? We've done a lot of research. What are some of the conclusions and recommendations that have come out of the research we've done? What drives East Bay's economy? And really, there's kind of 3 fundamental kind of components that we identified. The research and innovation institutions are important. The UC Berkeley's, the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. Why are they important? They're not just important because they employ a lot of people, but really what matters is the multiplier effect. What do I mean by that? For every job that's at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, there's a multiplier effect. There's people that are hired to provide services for them. There's, because of the income that they bring, they generate, bring money into the community. A recent book shows that in innovation industries, and in kind of some of the innovation work that's being done, the multiplier effect is 5 jobs for every 1 direct job. So for one job at Sandia, there's typically 5 jobs. And a lot of those jobs, 3 out of 5 of those jobs, tend to be higher paying, higher skilled, higher wage positions. That multiplier effect is important. Oakland's world-class support and the jobs that are generated. And again, we're not just talking about the direct jobs with the world-class support, but the import and export work, all of the different industries that are really connected. And Dr. Thornburg talked a lot about the different things that are being exported like that. All of those are connected to that work. One of the things too that I think we also forget is East Bay's connectivity to Silicon Valley and the Greater Bay Area is important. It's important on a lot of levels. One of the things we've seen as we look at, I spend quite a bit of time in Santa Clara County and San Mateo looking at those economies, is they're as dependent on the East Bay as the East Bay is dependent on them. Those national labs, the alumni coming out of UC Berkeley connect with a lot of the contract manufacturers in Silicon Valley. A lot of the new product introductions are largely a relationship between the assets of the East Bay and Silicon Valley and the creative work coming out of San Francisco. So East Bay as this hub and this connectivity to these other sub-regions within the Bay Area is an important part of really what drives innovation and drives employment opportunities in our community. We're looking at what happened in terms of overall employment gain from 2007 to 2012. And I think the important finding here is at the top level we have San Francisco County. Saw very little of an impact from the Great Recession. Matter of fact, between 2000 and 2009, its employment never really dropped. We can talk about that a little bit later, but I'm a little more interested in East Bay right now. We also see that Silicon Valley also saw a drop between 2008 and 2009, but it's recovered pretty quickly. California even lower, but even further below that is the East Bay. The East Bay was hit harder by the Great Recession in terms of overall employment than either California, Silicon Valley, or San Francisco County. And we'll talk about why that is a little bit later, but I think it's important to note that this was a major economic impact, and it hit our region harder than it did a lot of others, both statewide and some of our neighbors to the west and to the south. But I think it's also important to note that the impact varied tremendously, depending on what industry you're in, depending on your educational background. So this was not kind of we all felt the pain. It was, I mean, we can look at kind of 4 industries that all saw increases in the East Bay, increases in employment from 2007 to 2012 of over 5%. So healthcare, management of companies and enterprises, professional, scientific, and technical services, arts, entertainment, and recreation. All 4 of those industries saw increases in the last 5 years of employment by over 5% in East Bay. You know, management of companies and enterprises is something that was somewhat unique to East Bay. A lot of that's driven by that world-class port and the growth of exports and the opportunities there. Healthcare is something that we're seeing kind of standard, and we've seen growth, you know, across the country. Large that's driven by the demographic realities. But even professional, scientific, and technical services, arts, entertainment, all again seeing over 5% growth over the last 5 years. But we also see there are some industries that were hit pretty substantially over that 5-year period. Wholesale trade saw a pretty big drop. Transportation, warehousing, information was one that was, you know, largely hit significantly in East Bay. A lot of these are your telecommunications resellers. They saw a loss of 15% in East Bay alone, where there was increases in San Francisco and Silicon Valley. Manufacturing also saw a pretty significant drop of 17% over that 5-year period. So again, this is a significant impact in East Bay, but the impacts were very different depending on what industry you're in, and also we'll talk about it later where in the East Bay you were located. So this is kind of a scary graph, so let me give you a little background on what we're talking about here. So on the vertical axis, so this is college, we are going to do a quiz on this afterwards. Location quotient is a measure of concentration. So if our East Bay has the average amount of healthcare, our location quotient is 1.0. If we have twice as much as 2.0. So anything above 1.0 shows that we have a relatively high concentration versus the US. Professional, scientific, and technical services, arts and entertainment, real estate, these are all things that the region is a high concentration of. The bottom axis is our expectation of growth over the next 5 years. So finances, insurance, educational services, private educational services, healthcare and social systems, we all expect to grow by over 2% a year over the next 5 years. Gives you some sense. We'll be looking at these graphs more moving forward. So these are the ones, let me go back, these are the ones that we expect to grow at kind of a faster rate over the next 5 years. So where are these jobs going to be? These are going to impact when we start talking about occupations. These are some of the industries that we expect to see less growth. And these are the industries also, not surprisingly, that we're less concentrated in. Retail trade, manufacturing, wholesale trade, all things that we're seeing less expectation for growth over the next 5 years. One of the things we want to look at, this traditional industry approach is valuable in looking at growth, but I think our focus really is on kind of the workforce and economic development. And one of the things we wanted to get a better understanding of are the skills and the educational kind of requirements of different industries. So we combined kind of industries, what we call industry clusters, really to look at where the jobs are going to be. And the idea is that in each of these industry clusters, there's an ability for somebody to go, if they're in, let's say, arts, entertainment, and hospitality. These are largely the service industry, and foods and restaurants and hotels, and leisure. They can move, individuals in that industry cluster are able to kind of move employment from one to the other. Energy. Energy includes a lot of the stuff that's happening in renewable energy, but also some of the petroleum and the non-renewable energy as well. Food preparation, manufacturing, healthcare, ICT, or information communications technology. This is largely our broader technology realm in telecommunications and software. Life sciences, this is biotechnology, biopharma, medical devices, and then transportation and logistics. So these are some of the clusters we're going to look at in terms of where their jobs are and where their growth is. And we can see that, again, the areas that we have a high concentration in East Bay, there's ICT, information and communication technology. One thing I forgot to mention, the size of the sphere represents the size of total employment. So, for example, ICT has considerably more jobs than food preparation manufacturing, but we have a relatively high concentration of both of those. And these are also the industries, these industry clusters are also largely the ones that we're going to see growth over the next 5 years, where the jobs are going to be. One of the things, too, is I've looked at some studies, and we talk about advanced manufacturing in the East Bay. And really, advanced manufacturing, where we're strong, where our growth is really connected with 3 industry clusters. That information communications technology, the energy subsector, and biomedical, and biopharma, biotechnology. Those 3 areas of advanced manufacturing is really where the growth is. Everything outside of that, we don't expect much growth, and we really don't have much in the way of a real industry presence. Those are our real 3 components of advanced manufacturing. So when you think about those, think about really focus on those 3 aspects of it. So let's look at, some of these maps really show, and you can kind of, the report will dig into that deeper, really shows where the jobs are. And the first 2 are pretty nicely, the map, the darkness of the red shows how many jobs there are. And the first two industry clusters, hospitality, arts, entertainment, hospitality, is pretty nicely distributed across the region. You have a fair amount of jobs, really it kind of follows the population. You also see that in healthcare. Healthcare has kind of a nice distribution of jobs. The one maybe challenging thing about this is, at least for arts, entertainment, and hospitality, this tends to be a lower paying, lower wage industry. These other industries, life sciences, food preparation, manufacturing, information communication technologies, are largely concentrated in certain hubs and in certain subregions. And we'll talk about that, but you can look at ICT particularly, it's largely in the Tri-Valley and Southern Alameda. And that's where the majority of those jobs are found. And we'll get into kind of the differences, where these clusters exist geographically. But that does have an impact in terms of what we're seeing in terms of to be done. It's important for us to recognize not all jobs are created equal. And there's been a lot of research done on this, but we're going to kind of provide a basic kind of structure, 3-tier structure for looking at jobs. Tier 1 jobs. These are high-skill, high-wage positions, typically require a 4-year degree or more. On average, in the East Bay, they're about $80,000 a year in terms of payment. Tier 2 jobs. These are office and administrative positions. These are production, a lot of the construction jobs, teaching positions. These are largely your middle wage, middle skill positions. These averages pay about $44,000 a year. On Tier 3, these are your food service, retail, cleaning. These are your low skill, typically service positions that on average pay about $24,000 a year, $25,000 a year. Okay, so here's the quiz. Over the last 5 years, which of these 3 tiers have we really seen our drop in employment? So how many people say it's the Tier 1 jobs? Okay. How many people say it's the Tier 2 jobs? This is a smart group. How many people say the Tier 3 jobs? Okay, good. Yeah, I kind of let the cat slip there, didn't I? One of the interesting things, and one of the reasons I've really enjoyed looking and studying East Bay, is some of the issues that are happening nationally, whether we're looking at immigration, whether we're looking at this change in terms of the occupational profile of our jobs, or whether we're talking about kind of an employment change at all, is happening here first. And one of the challenges, so let me get back to kind of what the data shows, Tier 2 jobs are where all the job losses are. Why are these? These are jobs that are often found in the housing industry, which is a particular hit. But it's those jobs that can be outsourced and automated. A lot of the manufacturing positions that have been automated. A lot of those positions that can be offshore, that require some skill, but not necessarily a professional design position. One of the things that we see in manufacturing is assembly positions. A lot of the ways are going away. You're seeing this really split. People that are designing or involved in quality control, kind of the higher end of it, those jobs are growing. But a lot of the jobs, the good manufacturing jobs that are putting those things together, a lot of them are disappearing. And we're seeing that in this chart. This is not only true in East Bay, it's true nationally. And one of the questions that we asked earlier, why was East Bay hit harder in terms of employment than California or Silicon Valley or San Francisco? Because we have a larger percentage of Tier 2 occupations than the state, than either our neighbors. These Tier 2 jobs are the ones that are really taking hit. And to be honest, they're not necessarily growing. Now, that doesn't mean that all Tier 2 jobs we should stay away from. The plurality of jobs are still found in tier 2, about 45%. But a large portion of those are disappearing, and they're largely not coming back. If we look at the recession, the tier 1 and the tier 2 jobs, they dropped a little bit in 2008, 2009, but those, they picked back up. We're well above those averages. Those tier 2 jobs are really where the impact was. So that gives you kind of a sense of where employers are and how those have changed over the last 5 years. Let's take a look at our residents. So we really focused on the workforce and the workers and the jobs here. Now we're going to look at the residents, and the people who live here and how prepared they are for the world's work. And one of the things, and Dr. Thornburg made a good point. The middle class has really been mugged. I think was your quote, right? Mugged. Well, in some ways that's true in the employment world as well. The areas that have been hit by high unemployment, the areas that have had higher unemployment starting in 2007 before the recession. These are the communities that had over really 6 to 7% unemployment. We're talking about Richmond. We're talking about parts of Oakland, Bay Point. These are the areas that had before the recession that were 6 to 7%. And the scary thing is 5 years later, these are also the areas that have really seen the biggest impacts. These are the areas that have really been hit hardest. So the areas that sustained high unemployment were the areas that were that showed high unemployment anyway. So how is this? Josh, if all the jobs are losing tier 2, that should be the kind of the middle class, middle wage jobs. Those are the people that should have saw the impact. So it should have been the areas in the middle. The fact of the matter, what happened is a lot of the people, as they lost their tier 2 jobs, they went and took those tier 3 jobs and pushed a lot of the people out at the bottom. And so we've seen the areas, again, the Richmonds, the Bay Points, the San Pablos, those areas are the areas that have seen their unemployment rate increase over the last years by 6 or 7%. The places that were hit hardest are the places that have really seen a sustained impact and really what we call some structural changes in terms of the ability to find employment in these communities. Areas in the Tri-Valley, Lafayette, they've seen a 1 to 1.5, maybe 2% increase, whereas some of those other areas have seen 6 and 7% increases in employment. That's important. So one of the things we also found that a lot of this was connected to educational attainment. So for example, Community Bay Point, 58-60% of adults 25 and older have a high school degree or less as their highest level of education. They've seen an increase in employment. And this isn't, so they were at about 6.5%, 7% now. Now they're about 13%. So their increase was 6%. City of San Pablo, same thing, 63. Almost 2/3 of the adults in that community have a high school degree or less as their highest form of education. Their unemployment rate is almost doubled. Whereas the town of Lafayette, 10% of adults have a high school degree or less at their highest level, and their overall unemployment rate has only increased by 1% over that 5-year period. So it gives you a sense of kind of what's happening in terms of employment opportunities, and some of this really has and have-nots as it relates to employment opportunities. So one of the other things that's important to look at is there's a lot of talk in terms of employment about population growth and the impact that has on labor force participation rate. East Bay, on the whole, has been growing a little bit faster than its neighbors to the south or to the west, but still is relatively a low population growth area compared to California as a whole. And most of that growth in population is driven by immigration. Over 1/4, and this is, again, one of the issues that East Bay is almost dealing with ahead of the nation, is the issue of immigration. Over 700,000 of East Bay residents were born outside of the country. They're diverse ethnically. 25% are from Mexico, about 12% from the Philippines, 10% from China, 8% India, really a broad swath. And just over 1/4 are linguistically isolated, meaning nobody over the age of 14 can speak English very well. That has some impacts on the workforce too. Interestingly enough, the unemployment rate for immigrants is actually 3% lower than the US-born population here. But we find that a large portion of them, almost 1 in 5, are overskilled for their occupation. They have a bachelor's degree or higher, and are working largely in a tier 3 occupation. One of the challenges that we saw in the data looking at this is how do we use those skilled immigrants, how do we get them in a job that they're using all that training? That's an important part of one of the things we learned in looking at this. Poverty in the East Bay, as we look at it in its kind of aggregation, really is not nearly as big of an issue as it is in California as a whole. About 11% of our regions living in poverty. It's a little bit higher, with age. The younger you are, the more likely you to be in poverty. But the real issue in terms of poverty is how it's distributed. It's not the overall aggregate numbers, because the aggregate numbers aren't that bad. It's really the specific communities where it is hit hardest. One of the things that we spent some time looking at is the skills gap. What do I mean by skills gap? What is this? What are the skills, the abilities that our workers don't have that employers need? And there's lots of different ways of looking at that. One way of looking at it is comparing the workers that work here versus the people that live in the East Bay. Does that make sense? So you have people that, I know Julie, you know what I'm talking about, because we talk about this all the time. But the issue of, you have people that live in the East Bay and their skills, and there's people that work in the East Bay and they're different. Right? People are traveling from outside our region. And one of the areas that we see in all of the jobs, we actually have a larger percentage of people employed in the East Bay than we do have the resident employed workforce. So we're actually bringing in people to work in our region. But the area that we see the most the greatest difference is the sales and office occupations, and particularly in some of the skilled kind of tier 2, tier 1 positions in technical sales representatives, some of the technical training positions. Those sales and office occupations really are where we have the greatest discrepancy between what we're generating internally and the jobs that are available. We also spend some time looking at where are wages increasing considerably. Where are the wages by occupation? And one of the things you look at the last 5 years is if we see a certain occupation growing by 30, or its wages growing by 30, 40, 50%, that's something employers generally don't like increasing pay a lot. So typically that's a function of there's not enough people filling that applicant pool for them to find that. And the areas, not surprising, looking at the kind of the general occupational categories, healthcare practitioners, kind of the skilled healthcare positions, architecture, engineering, and some of the business and financial operations, kind of the analyst jobs. Some of those are the ones that are really growing well above average in terms of wages. When we look at specific occupations, dietetic technicians, chemical engineers, property managers, these are wages have seen an increase by 40% from 2007 to 2011. At a time when when wages were largely stagnant, these areas saw significant increases. So these give us some indication of where we need to be focusing our training efforts looking forward. One of the other things that's important, now, replacement jobs are important, if I was talking about workforce kind of issues anywhere, but they're particularly important in the East Bay. For every 2 new jobs that are available because of growth, there's 3 replacement jobs. That's higher than it is in California, that's higher than it is in Silicon Valley or San Francisco. Replacement jobs are important. And they're typically found in a lot of the more secure kind of tier 2 occupations. And again, these are these technical sales representative positions, automotive service technicians, police, some of the public sector jobs as well. These are some of the key replacement jobs. In the report, you'll see kind of where we identified 15 replacement, kind of quality replacement jobs. These are jobs with well above median wages that we expect to see considerable growth and considerable demand over the next 5 years. So, lastly, we want to spend a little time talking about that education data and looking at kind of how we're doing as a region. Overall, East Bay residents have a lower educational attainment level compared to San Francisco or Silicon Valley, but considerably higher than California. Okay. Again, high school graduation rates, though, are high in East Bay. Not quite as high as Silicon Valley, but higher than California. The K-12 system, whether we're looking at English, whether we're looking at math, whether we're looking at science, is generally doing better than California as a whole in terms of percentage of students that achieve either a proficient or advanced level on these different standardized tests. And that's pretty much at all grade levels, from 2nd through 11. We see that in all 3 areas. Again, trying to keep up with, Santa Clara County tends to have the highest level, but East Bay is just a few percentage points behind that. I want to talk a little bit, and Randy talked a little bit about the value of career academies and lean pathways. One of the important things, and this is kind of one of the few things I want to kind of have you think about when you think about kind of jobs and training. Educational attainment is important, and getting the academic degree is important. We showed some of the data that kind of supports that. But it's also fundamentally important to connect people to skills in the world of work. So we need to do both, and we can't sacrifice one for the other. You can't put somebody in a training program, because the fact of the matter is they're going to train for that job, but you're really preparing for the next 5 jobs that they're going to train for. Remember, jobs are churning and moving faster. So our job as educators and trainers is not just to prepare them for that next job, it's to prepare them for the next 5 jobs. And more importantly, teach them how to learn so they can develop the skills to get those next 5 or 6 jobs. Why is that important? Why am I talking about that? These career academies, what we're talking about, career academies, linked learning pathways, have all shown to be increased both earnings. A study showed that a Cal Career Academy graduate sustained earnings of 11% over a 5-year period, or a 10-year period, versus a control group. California Partnership Academy showed that it did better on the state averages for both the graduation rate as well as meeting those A through G course requirements for CSU and UC. And they also showed a greater likelihood of going to college at some level, which is important. So again, that value needs to be on not just educational attainment, but also training people to learn the next skills, the next ability moving forward. Some of that completion rate data that they talked about. The important thing here is East Bay is just under 60% are completing, are staying in and continuing with their educational objectives. What you're learning in the area of study is important. STEM degrees are, there's kind of been some discussions whether we have too many STEM degrees or not enough. If you look at employer data, I would argue that we're still undersupplying. If we're looking at the increase in wages, we are still undersupplying our available workforce to have a STEM, I should say that, science, technology, engineering, or mathematics. 4 of the top 6 degrees by median wages were in that STEM area. The one that wasn't was biology. In biology, you really have to go get a graduate degree. But then you saw a considerable bump in wages. Certificates provide a really good opportunity, particularly for those individuals that aren't ready for a bachelor's degree, and the stackable certificates are something that allow people to work to something while engaging in that work experience, which is important. So lastly, I want to finish with what does all this mean? East Bay was hit hard by the Great Recession because it has a large proportion of those Tier 2 occupations. Just because Tier 2 occupations are declining doesn't mean we should say, well, we need to stay away from those jobs. That's not true. What you're seeing is those jobs that can be automated, those jobs that can be outsourced, they probably are going to continue to do so. But there are still good Tier 2 jobs out there, but it's something we need to be aware of and we need to think about when we're training and when we're providing programs for workforce development. Really, job training and educational strategies should emphasize teaching job seekers how to continually learn new skills and really move towards Tier 1 occupations. And again, there's also been some discussion, the national, is a 4-year degree worth it? Again, I would argue yes it is, and there's some data to support that, even with the increased burden of debt and like that. But I think importantly, we need to look at understanding that it's not just about educational attainment. It's about work experience and understanding the industry and those career pathways and those linked learning opportunities offer that. It's also about developing skills that are specific to industries and abilities to be able to communicate with them. That's an important part of these job training programs. We need to look at it more than just, well, everybody needs to get a 4-year degree. It's more complex than that, as it usually is. We need to look at educational attainment in high unemployment communities by expanding certificates and incremental degree programs that allow people to kind of work and incrementally move forward as they go. It's not always realistic to say, hey, you need to go to school for the next 4 years and take on all that debt. That's not realistic. And to be honest, it's not always a good job strategy or employment opportunity. We need to really expand those programs that improve functional English language skills in the context of industry work experience. Really, that needs to happen here because there's very few communities in California or the world that have such a large, skilled immigrant population as East Bay. And I think we're an important opportunity to experiment and develop those programs. Some of them are already there. We need to expand and build off what we've already learned. East Bay EDA and a lot of the organizations do a great job of really facilitating increased connectivity within the East Bay to across the Bay Area and across Silicon Valley. We need to keep doing that. Because really, if you look at the industries that are growing, that have really grown in the last 5 years, their connectivity to the greater East Bay has largely been, I think, an important explainer as to why that's happening. Education programs really should expand those offerings that really focus on contextual learning. Again, not sacrificing academic achievement, that's critical, but putting it in the context of work, putting it in the context of industries and industry skills and work experience and that exposure is a critical part of connecting those dots. And lastly, and I think one of the things that we're learning, and I think we've taken some steps, but we need to continue to commit to measuring and providing quantitative and qualitative indicators that show how different strategies and programs are working. again, I think one of the things that's hard for us to do as we look at education is to say, well, we don't want to fail. Well, I'm going to tell you, it's okay to fail. It's okay to fail. You know what's not okay? It's not okay to fail and not learn why you failed, and learn how to improve it next time. So I think one of the challenges that I would leave us with today is, let's think about how we can measure the different programs, the different strategies that we use, and really learn from them and develop better programs and really build from there. And on that note, so thank you.